Knock. Hi everyone, if I can get your attention, please. Thank you. Yeah. Um, Hi everyone. Kia ora tatou and good evening. Really nice to see so many familiar faces, but at the same time, so really good to see so many new faces as well. Can I take this opportunity to to extend my appreciations to members of the board who are here this evening, to our guest speaker Geraldine, who's made her way all the way from Geneva through to Auckland, Wellington, and here in our offices this evening. But of course, to all the staff and interpreters who work for Interpreting New Zealand. So my name is Arthur Chin, and I'm the CE of Interpreting New Zealand. I'm fairly new in my role, but I'm really pleased to say that this evening we've got the amazing Robin Haas, who's right at the back. Yeah, and I've replaced Robin in incredibly huge shoes to fill. Robin's been absolutely amazing and a great supporter of this amazing organization and of the work that our interpreters do. So really good to see you, Robin, this evening. And at the same time, probably without holding you back too much, I do want to say thank you for all the support that you have given to all of us here in Interpreting New Zealand. We're celebrating our 29th anniversary. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we haven't had the celebrations in the last couple of years, but really pleased to say that now that COVID is under control and hopefully it stays this way, this will give us an opportunity to get together on a more regular basis from now on. And next year we'll be celebrating our 30th year, our 30th anniversary, and I'm really excited about this. And hopefully we have a large, bigger crowd next year. So before I invite Mary, our chair, to come address us, a couple of housekeeping to follow. In case of an earthquake, drop, hole, and cover, the exits are down the hallway to your left and my right. There's a flight of stairs towards the end of the hallway. The exit in a comes method down the flights of stairs, and the gathering point is just the car park in front of the building or along Abel Tasman Street. In the toilets, the gents and the ladies are that direction towards the left, round the corner. So on this note, Mary, can I invite you to come speak to us?
The notes out of my pocket. Kia ora, tātou. Today we're celebrating Interpreting New Zealand's 29th birthday. I started serving on the board in 2014, but I've known this organisation, its work and its people since I joined M-Class, which is now called Kiwi Class, first as an ESOL teacher and shortly thereafter as its manager. And that was in 2007, because at that time our two organisations were partners through our membership in the Multicultural Services Centre. So that means I've been associated with Interpreting New Zealand for just about half of its 29 years. Right. And I think I can safely say that in all that time there has never been such an onslaught of changes as those we have experienced since early 2020, and we will continue to contend with for some time yet. There's COVID, of course, which is profoundly changing the dynamics of work in all sectors, not just in the world of interpreting. But for our sector, it's the government's Language Assistance Services program, co-led by MB and the Department of Internal Affairs, which is really keeping us on our toes. This program was established as long ago as 2017, preceded of course by a period of consultation with providers and stakeholders. And our organisation, through Robin, took every opportunity that was offered to continue to influence and keep well informed about and contribute to how this program was going to develop. And now we're in the midst of the development phase. And that's a bit scary. It's scary for everybody, interpreters, request coordinators, trainers, administrators, management, because the changes decreed by government mean we have to change too. Maybe a little, maybe a bit more than a little. We don't know yet what that will actually mean in the long run for this organisation. or for each and every individual who works with us. But what I do know now is that Arthur, our new Chief Executive, is the very best person to build on Robin's legacy and to take us into the new future. He picked up where she left off without a pause, getting involved even before his official start time, I have to say. We told him he had the job, and then we told him, and before you start, we need you to do X, Y, and Z because things are rushing along at a big pace. He's been in the job for barely 2 months, and he's already actively steering us through this next phase. And what I also know is that these changes could take the country a long way towards achieving what our founders envisaged 29 years ago. Their values are still our values. Their vision of what New Zealand needs and how we could help make that happen is still our vision. It's there in 2 of the objectives of our Constitution. We don't just exist to provide a service. We also exist to promote awareness of the benefits of professional interpreting and to support the whole profession in developing and maintaining standards of practice. That was in our Constitution right from the very beginning. It's even more clearly there in our vision and mission statements. We adopted these in late 2019, after the board and senior management had reviewed who we are now and what we do now against all 7 of our constitutional objectives. Our newly stated vision in 2019, and that we now have, is that this country, Aotearoa New Zealand, is free from language barriers. And our mission is that everybody in New Zealand has access to interpreting services of the highest professional and ethical standards. And the government has taken these values on board too. The Language Assistance Services Program aims to raise awareness among all government departments of the value of using professionally trained interpreters, to raise the overall calibre of interpreting by setting minimum standards, and through endorsing a panel of providers to make it easier for everybody who works in the public sector to access interpreters. Their plan for doing this and how they're executing it, that's the scary bit. But I have faith that our organisation, which has always delivered interpreting services of the very highest standard, which has always advocated for our standards to be the New Zealand norm, which has always been very supportive of all its interpreters and all its staff, I have faith that this organisation will adapt and stay strong, and in 12 months' time, our 30th birthday will indeed be a milestone to celebrate.
Oh, thank you, Mary. That's very inspirational. For our next agenda item, we have invited our guest speaker. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I do want to say that she is absolutely amazing. For those of you who know me, I've spent time as a banker and in the last 10 years working in an academic institution, and I've come across a whole lot of individuals and characters, but no one as amazing as our guest speaker, Geraldine. And before I invite Geraldine to come up and address us, I do want to tell you a bit about Geraldine. So Geraldine, she's Director of Pacific Health at the Ministry of Health and the interim Pacific lead for Health New Zealand. And she's been in health and social sectors for the past 25 years. And Geraldine's extensive governance experience includes time as Chief Executive of the Te Manino Trust, the National Pacific Program Manager at the Ministry of Health. She's the Chair of the Wellington Community Trust, and as a consultant of the Pacific Perspectives. And Geraldine has qualifications in education, business, and specific expertise in working with Pacific communities, primarily in the health sector, but also in well-being and social services. She has a particular interest in commissioning and engaging communities and planning and funding decisions. And probably just on that note, when I first met with Geraldine to give her an overview of a keynote speech, she's actually just arrived a few weeks back in Geneva. And it was amazing. I think it was late in the afternoon for me, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in New Zealand, and it was 6:30 in the morning. And this gives you a real perspective into her dedication, but also her support for organizations such as ours. And prior to Geraldine's current role, she was General Manager for Child, Youth and Localities at Capital and Coast DHB. And she's been the Director of Pacific Health for over 2 years, joining the ministry just as the country was moving forward or moving into lockdown. So on this note, Geraldine, can I invite you to come speak with us, please?
Thank you, Arthur, for that very kind welcome. Sometimes I feel that it might be too much, and I hope I don't let you all down. But ngā mihi mahana kia koutou katoa whatalo whātu mā lole sui fua maua ma le langi e mamā. May I start by giving apologies from Dr. Bloomfield, because I think that I got the invite because Dr. Bloomfield couldn't make it this evening. And often when I'm asked to speak on behalf of him, I can see the disappointment on people's faces because he has made such a significant contribution to our COVID response, and he's become such an icon of our New Zealand society. And I know that he would be really disappointed. I left him in Geneva because he got COVID. Apologies that he wouldn't be able to come here today and give his best wishes to you all on your 29th birthday here at Interpreter New Zealand. So, as Arthur said, I'm Geraldine Clifford Lidstone, and I'm wearing two hats because if you weren't aware, there's some quite big health reforms going on at the moment. So I have my substantive role at the Ministry of Health, but I'm also working 0.5 on this new system, which I can't wait to let go of. It will become a legal entity on the 1st of July. So as I was preparing, I have some notes here, so if you don't mind, I will be looking down. But as I was preparing to talk to you tonight, I started to consider what it takes to be an interpreter in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And where I landed for the most part is that in New Zealand, the path of interpreting, or at least needing an interpreter, starts with the journey of migration. And if it's not a journey of migration, if you're a first generation New Zealander, it often is tainted with challenge, with difficulty, and with inequity. And I'd be interested in your views if we get a chance to talk about how your journey has been to become an interpreter. And as you will all be aware, New Zealand has 3 languages. There's Te Reo Māori, there's English, and New Zealand Sign Language. So if you haven't come from a migrant community, that's all right, Arthur. If you haven't come from a migrant community, you will still probably have, only one of those 3 languages comes without disadvantage, and I can tell you now it's not Te Reo Māori and it's not New Zealand Sign Language. But if you haven't come from, if your journey is through Te Reo, you know, there is a journey of challenge and of difficulty in coming to a new country. And we know that despite the said economic and social benefits of migrating to New Zealand, that there's a significant body of evidence that highlights that there are lots of challenges that families and people face when they come here. And I just wanted to run through some of those. You're probably keenly aware of them. This disintegration of family structures, isolation, people not having somewhere to live, feeling lonely, mental health problems, loss of identity, disruption to the parent and child relationship, and the inability to communicate with the people around you, which is so important. And where do we see these issues manifest? We see it in our education system, we see it in our health system, we see it in our justice system, and our welfare system, and our employment system. And who are the people working in these extremely challenging situations? It is yourself. You are the ones that bridge that language barrier that Mary has said in the vision. And there's a few stories I'd like to share with you. So first off, just acknowledging the expertise in the room, because I ran a consultation on rheumatic fever. Now, rheumatic fever, the precursor to rheumatic fever is a sore throat, and it's not just any sore throat, it's strep A. That is the strand of strep that could cause rheumatic fever. Once you have a strep A and it's not diagnosed, it can cause aches, and then that turns into rheumatic fever. If you don't deal with the strep A, you get rheumatic fever. If you don't deal with rheumatic fever, you get rheumatic heart disease, and this is completely avoidable. There's medication for it, but many Māori and Pacific children get this illness at a rate that is unseen in the rest of the world. So I ran this community consultation to talk to people about rheumatic fever, a Tongan community, and I took with me a Tongan language speaker, and most of the session was me speaking in English and Tongan language speaker translating what I was saying. And everyone was so engaged, and I was so pleased about it until we got to the very end. And one of the participants stood up to thank me for coming and said, I want to thank you so much because I've learned so much about romantic fever of the heart. And to this day, I have no idea whether the entire session they were talking of romantic fever of the heart. So, from this experience, I gained a deep appreciation for the standards and training that underpins the work that you do as interpreters, and I thank you for your commitment to quality. I think we all understand the impact that COVID has had on our lives. Don't need to go over that again, and continues to have on our lives. When I started in my current role, I came to it, as Arthur said, from Cavill Coast DHB, and it was right at the start of the pandemic. And at that stage of the pandemic, we were just looking at what happened in Italy, which was the first country to really get the impact of COVID. And, you know, the number of people that were requiring ventilators and going into the system. So at the hospital, we started to plan, and we had to do forecasting based on what we were seeing in the numbers of people going into hospital in Italy. And so we were starting to forecast that we would need probably 1,000 beds for people who were having respiratory illness. And we were starting to have conversations about how to prioritise the care. So then I go to, so this is the worst case scenario, 1,000 people. Well, how do you stop that? So I change hats and I go across to the Ministry of Health. And when I'm at the Ministry of Health, this is where we start to talk about communicating. How do we communicate these complex messages to communities that had never heard some of the health terminology that we use every day, epidemiology? Most people now use that in their everyday language, and I know certainly in my family they couldn't even pronounce it before COVID. And so we absolutely had to reach into communities, and the only way that we could do that was through interpreting services. And so we see this massive wave of government agencies all coming saying, we need interpreters, we need to get this documentation written, oral, we need it now, you know, we need good quality, and we need people that are familiar with working in a context where the language is challenging. And so again, from this, I gained a huge appreciation for the work that you do behind the scenes, face to face, helping our communities to protect themselves. And again, I thank you for the work that you do. So when I was talking with Arthur a few weeks ago, me from Geneva and him from Manawatu, he asked me whether I could share some of my experience as someone who has had cancer and continues to have treatment for cancer. And I was like, oh, what can I say that doesn't sound doom or gloom? Because while I work in the health sector, the other part of me as a patient is I find it's very important to talk about my experiences and to share those experiences, hopefully that other people can benefit from it. And so while that might sound scary that I was diagnosed from cancer and still have treatment for cancer, I have to acknowledge that I'm extremely thankful to be very well and I continue to thrive. And it's that I wanted to share with you, because imparting something meaningful from myself to you is that I talked earlier about how you are at the front face of some really challenging situations of people's health and well-being, of people's navigation through the justice system, of people struggling to understand how to live a good life and understand how life works in New Zealand. And I thought the best thing I could remind you to do is to look after yourself. And when you are in the midst of those challenging circumstances, even though you have your professional self, which removes your, well, I would think would remove yourself from actually getting right into the emotion of these experiences that families have, I have no doubt that in some way that you will absorb some of that into your being and into your body, and there needs to be a way of outlet so that you don't carry that with you on an ongoing basis. So what I do, what I've learned is I try to listen to the voice inside. And if you don't know what that voice is, it's that voice now that's going, what is that voice? It's that one. To just be aware of when you're tired, to protect yourself in ways, and some of the ways that I find is, just having a bath and immersing yourself underwater so you create that disconnect, to be aware of pressures from family, from your own family, which may drain on you, and just taking, I do this every morning, I should probably do it more, but really just taking 5 really deep breaths every day and being thankful for everything that I have around me. And I get to walk along the waterfront every morning, I try to. And as I walk along, I make sure I take my 5 breaths and I look out to the harbour and just be really thankful for what a beautiful city that we live in. So it's not deep and meaningful about cancer, but it is about a reminder to you to practice self-love and to appreciate yourself and what you do and the contribution you make. So as Arthur said last week, Dr. Bloomfield and I were in Geneva, and some of you may have seen on the TV when you go in so we're at the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is hosted by the United Nations, and some of you may have seen on the TV the United Nations room, which looks like a big semicircle. Okay, so when you go into that room, it's really unusual because there's, I think there's about 192 countries that all speaking different languages that sit in that room behind their country nameplate, and it's in alphabetical order, so you have to go round and look. When you walk into that room and that room is in session, it is like you could hear a pin drop. You can't hear anything. And it's a really unusual room to be in with so many people, and it's so quiet. So the first thing that strikes you is how quiet it is despite how many people it is. The second thing is when you sit behind your country nameplate, the first thing you do is put your earpiece on. And in your earpiece, you hear the voice of an interpreter that is telling you. So someone is talking, but the room's so big, you can't really hear them. In your earpiece is an interpreter, and that interpreter, you can change the channel for what language you want to understand the proceedings in. And this interpreter, who you cannot see, sits there and explains to you what everyone is saying. And they sit in this room, they're invisible. They just sit in your ear and you can hear them. I'm not sure if any of you have had the opportunity, but I was just astounded at how fast and how clever and how, they have never heard some of these words before, but they are just interpreting like that. And I just thought it was phenomenal. So this was the context, and I'd just spoken to Arthur, and so this was the context that I started to think about what I'm going to say to you today. So I'm sitting here with this interpreter in my ear, and it was a stark reminder to me that without you, global accordance would not be achieved. And without you, lives would have been lost. And without you, families would starve and children would suffer. So I wanted to thank you, Invisible Champions, for the COVID response, for the communities and all the agencies that have relied on you for help. I wanted to thank Arthur for the invitation to talk, and I wanted to encourage you to continue on this wonderful journey, because I think the last 2 years have been hard, but the last 2 years have brought to a fore all the wonderful that has been invisible work that you have done. So on that note, Ia Manuela was whanau, happy birthday, and whakatai. Thank you.
Geraldine, before we take a seat, we'd like to present you a gift. Mary, would you like to help me present a gift to Geraldine? Hopefully I haven't broken this bottle. But thankfully, if it wasn't for Jennifer's good wrapping, I'll be in trouble.
Here we are, Geraldine. Thank you very, very much. Thank you especially for those words of encouragement to keep going, because yes, it is a tough time at the moment. It has been a tough time, and we do need to keep going, because it is so important for all those other people who live in New Zealand and make their homes in New Zealand. And thank you for inspiring us to do so.
Thank you, Mary.
And just for the next segment of our agenda, talking about interpreters and the work that many of our interpreters do, we've got a couple of recognitions that we'd like to raise. Can I just check? It's Rathan here this evening. Oh, come on up, Rathan. Come on up, please. So one of the things that we would normally do on our anniversary is to recognize interpreters who's been with us for a number of years. In this case, we have 4 interpreters tonight whom we'd like to recognize for their contributions to us. And these 4 interpreters that we have, in fact, 2 of them are here this evening with your family. They've been with us for 20 years. So 20 years is a very, very long time. And just on the back of an envelope calculation, if you work on, say, an average of, say, 3 interpreting jobs a week, multiply over 40 week year, you get 120 jobs a year. And over 20 years, you can imagine that comes up to thousands and thousands of jobs. And that's how many jobs you and your fellow interpreters have touched and helped our communities. So thank you for that. And before I invite Mary to come up again to give Rathan an award, I spoke with Rathan and the other interpreters, and I just wanted to hear their stories. For someone who's new to the organization, it was really important for me to learn about their journey with Interpreting New Zealand, but more importantly, what got them started as an interpreter in the first place. So I've just put down a few notes. So Ratan Prakash, he speaks a number of languages: Fiji, Hindi, Punjabi, and he has his lovely wife and family attending this evening. So Ratan first arrived in New Zealand back in the mid-80s and settled as an immigrant in 1987. And very quickly, he knew what he wanted to do for a career. About a year later, he started possibly one of the first Hindi channels on Access Radio, one of the radio stations right here in Wellington. And in fact, back in those days, about 30 years ago, or over 30 years ago, the internet wasn't, in place. And what it meant was that the radio station was the channel or a community of sorts for migrants to come together to learn about what's happening back home, to learn to pick up news information, and also for entertainment. And it was around that time in the late 80s, early 90s that Rathan recalls there being a deportation case. It was one of the fairly large cases that was on the news. And one of the DJs that he worked with suggested that Ratan, with his language skill sets, he could work as an interpreter. And so Ratan signed up for the course with Interpreting New Zealand. And back in the early days, there wasn't a lot of recognition for the work that interpreters would do. And even though Ratan would travel to places like Whanganui and out of town for interpreting jobs, very often, sorry, I think that's me actually. Sorry, I thought what was that? And so very often when he was out of town for interpreting jobs, he was often asked to sit together with the he was actually asked to sit together with the prisoners or the accused, and especially when he was in court cases, which wasn't a great thing to have. And you can imagine that you'd be quite uncomfortable if you were to be in the same room, or in this case, in a dock alongside the accused. So Ratan would voice his concerns, and I'm really, really pleased to say that it's taken a bit of time, but it is a lot better now, the treatment for interpreters. In fact, interpreters are invited to sit alongside judges or with lawyers, and they're given the recognition that they duly deserve. And it is very clear that Ratan is not doing this for the money, but he's doing this more as a service to the community. He's a practicing justice of the peace and a very much admired member of his community who averages anywhere between 1 to 2 interpreting jobs a week right now. So if I can invite Mary to present Ratan with a recognition award. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. You're exactly the sort of person we need on this place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's been a long journey, but a very, very educational one for me. And I'm still willing to do many more. I just got a job today. But apart from this, but thank you for the recognition and the wonderful team we have. And one of the things that I have always stood by is Interpreting New Zealand, being loyal, been asked many a times to do, something outside, but I've stuck with the organization and I've always been here and I think I will be here for some time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And talking about quality interpreting, we are the only organization in the country that offers 24/7 interpreting services. And you can imagine that this is a services that's much needed for organizations like St. John's, but also for other government agencies such as the police and in individuals who may need interpreting services after hours. And the next individual that I'd like to call up is Kura. Is Kura here with us? Come on up, Kura. Now, I'd like to tell you a bit about Kura. Kura speaks a number of Cook Island languages, and I think she's here this evening with your husband, Grant.
He just left.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's right, we've got your gift here, and you don't have to share it with him.
Okay.
Now, so this is a really interesting conversation I've had with Kura, as was the one with Ratan as well. So Kura recalls being in Porirua, and she was driving some of her cousins to an Interpreting New Zealand course. And when she got there, she was wondering, what is this all about? So curiosity got the better of her, and she went into the room where the course was being delivered, and she was handed a few application forms, and she signed up to the course there and then. And that was how she started. Now, this is where it got really funny. And I have to say, when I spoke with Kura at that point in time, I had COVID. I think it was day 3 for me. And I was coughing quite a bit. And I was trying to mute myself so that my laughter wasn't coming through on the phone. And the funny story was that those who have gone through Interpreting New Zealand's course would know that one of the modules is an ethics course. In an ethics course, what you're told by Erwin, who's right at the back, is that you are not meant to be interpreting for a family member or someone that you know because of the perceived conflict of interest. Now, being a Cook Islander and located in Porirua, she knew 90% of the of her own community. So it was very difficult not to be interpreting for someone whom she knew. But that said, Kura loves interpreting. She loves it. She loves it for the fact that as a school teacher, Kura was a school teacher. It was a good way to gain some professional development by meeting with different people, interacting with the wider community. But at the same time, this also suited her, her job and her lifestyle, given the fact that interpreting for many of us, it is a part-time job. So Kura is an ambassador, clearly an ambassador for interpreting, not only in the literal sense, but also seen through her work as an interpreter. And she very actively encourages the young generation in the community to sign up for interpreting work because she sees it as value to what they can offer as a community service to their own community. So, so Kura has travelled on behalf of Interpreting New Zealand around the country for jobs, and her services as an interpreter is highly sought after, not just in Wellington, but she's also travelled to as far afield as places down south in Invercargill. So on that note, Geraldine, if you wouldn't mind, would you like to present our recognition award to Kura?
It'd be an honour.
There you go.
So what I know of the Cook Islands,
Yeah.
16 islands or 15? 15 islands, and how many dialects? 10. That makes you a very gifted and talented and smart woman. So, kia ora to you.
Thank you.
Would you like to
Thank
say a few
you. Yeah.
words?
When someone rang me last week or the week before that to say, "Can you come on Tuesday?" I was really 20 years. I had to do 20 years. And then I started pondering over why I'm still interpreting. Thank you for that wonderful speech tonight, and to you too. You were talking about your cancer, and that I was sitting there thinking that my flower tonight is a celebration of the many lives that we have changed in hospitals. It is about healing, isn't it? I think about interpreting in courts, and I think about the freedom, the restoration of families, and families coming together and lives changing through different systems. And I've been really proud and I'm honoured to be part of this organisation because it's more than just a job. In fact, when I joined it, I didn't know I was getting paid. When I was in the Gold Coast during the school holidays, and I remember my son asking my husband, "Do you get paid, Mum?" And I said, "Of course." Then my husband said, "No, she does not." And he's a bit confused. And then my husband said, "When she goes to visit in a hospital, she buys food and fruit and that, so that uses up all her money." But I think most of us are here not because of the money. I do it because I was thinking how it was all such fun, and I think about sharing with you how I just turned up. What is this about? Oh yeah, why not? But I don't think I was fully aware of the importance of this, communicating, not just about being a voice for our people, but comparing the differences in cultures, the differences in systems, the differences in family setups and backgrounds. It's all important for that, and bettering our communities. And I'm just really honoured, and I don't have words to say, but yeah. Thank you to everybody else. And I wear this flower tonight. In fact, I'm so sorry, but I've got a family service to go to in Porirua after this. But I'm wearing this flower to celebrate the lives that we've made, all of us. And we thank God for, in advance, for the many more lives that is going to be changed and touched by this organisation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kura. That was very touching. Thank you. And we have two other interpreters, but unfortunately they can't be here this evening. I know one of them is watching on the live stream from her home in Tauranga, and that's Chantel Taylor Bizet. So Chantel's our French interpreter, and she's a native speaker of French. And her skill sets were recognized during the time that she worked at the French embassy right here in Wellington. And over the last 15 years or so, Chantal has also taught translations at MFET to our very own diplomats. So how did Chantal's journey with interpreting New Zealand start, or how did it begin? So after leaving her work with the French embassy, Chantal started interpreting as a part-time job with interpreting in New Zealand. And she found that her skill sets was sought after, but it was also the opportunity to meet different people, but a chance to hear their stories and help to communicate their stories to whoever it was intended to go to. And then she later worked as a request coordinator for Interpreting New Zealand, connecting users of our services to our trained interpreters. And like with many of our interpreters, it was the nature of the job, it suited her lifestyle, and that was how she continued. So one of Chantel's most memorable experiences on the job, in fact, it was a fairly sad story that she shared with me, was that she was called up for a job with the New Zealand police. It was a situation whereby there was a group of young French travelers or tourists, and they were traveling in Hamilton. And unfortunately, there was a fatal car accident where one of the young tourists was involved in the accident. And it was due to her skill sets that she managed to communicate the concerns from the New Zealand police to the tourists, but at the same time help the tourists and one of their parents who later flew in from France through to New Zealand and to help them navigate the challenges that that someone new to a country would inevitably have to face. It was a professionalism, and that turned what was a really difficult conversation into something that was manageable, but also one that she did it in a very calm and respectful manner. And for that, she was accredited by the New Zealand Police for her professionalism. So unfortunately, Chantal's not able to travel with us here in Wellington, or not being able to be with us in person this evening, but she's watching from her home in Tauranga. So do want to say thank you to you, Chantal. And a recognition award is on the way to you. It's possible to arrive this afternoon. Thank you. And for our last speaker, for our last interpreter who's been with us for 20 years, in fact, 22 years, that's how long Tadisi Bode has been with us. So Tadisi speaks a language that not many of you have heard of, and including myself. So he speaks a language known as Oromo. How many of you have heard of Oromo? Wow, there's quite a few. Wow, well done. No, you don't count, Jennifer. So Tadisi or Oromo as a language, it comes from the eastern part of Africa, and it is also a language or dialect that's widely spoken in Kenya and Ethiopia. So Tadisi arrived in New Zealand first as a refugee in 1999 and is settled in Wellington. So he recognizes that resettlement can be very challenging, like what Geraldine was saying. And it's not just the language, but it's also missing the family connections and the cultural disconnect that he found very difficult. And he felt that with his skill sets and as he picked up English and his English proficiency improved, he realized that it was his job as a duty to the community to help support the new refugees who started to come through in later years. So there was one specific customer that he helped in his community, and recalled that as being one of the most challenging situations whereby that individual struggled not just with language but also settling in a new country, where he came with him a baggage of challenges, and many of those included situations or uncomfortable situations that refugees would have experienced in the home countries. And being able to communicate or being able to relay the concerns of the individuals was very important or very helpful to the individual, because that meant he could have his say and his voice could be heard in the wider community. So on that note, Tadisi, do want to say thank you for your contributions over the past 22 years. And again, your recognition award is on the way to you. Thank you. So on that note, that pretty much wraps up the formalities for this evening. I do want to say thank you all for coming this evening. It's really good to see many familiar faces, but new faces as well. Special thanks to Geraldine for making time to speak with us this evening. We still have plenty of food and drinks that Jennifer, but also the wider interpreting team has put together. And I do need to say that this organization that I'm part of, it's very, very amazing. And I just want to share one point of view. When I first started, in fact, it was on day one, I was asked to join a WhatsApp group. What's that all about? And then I realized on day two at 6 o'clock in the morning, I started getting ping messages because the staff members would greet each other good morning, and it just goes round and round good morning. So there was good morning from Peter, he could be in Masterton, and I was on a train from Manawa to the New Geneva. And there'll be good mornings from pretty much most of the other staff members. And the team here is amazing in the sense that they really love what they do and they're committed to the cause. So as I finish up my, this, what I'm about to say, I do want to say thank you to the team, every single one of you, because you guys are incredible people. If there was one sentence to describe, all of you have hearts of gold. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And thank you guys to all the interpreters and our guests this evening. Thank you for coming and hope to see you again next year as we celebrate our 30th. Cheers. Yeah. So with plenty of food and drinks, help yourselves, please.